Welcome to the Deepening Community. Each month we host a Zoom call, and we call these the Around the Table Conversation. They are conversations for the hearts of women. In the first half of the call, Robin, Sherry, and Dana share their hearts on a subject. And in the second half of the call, the women on the Zoom call get a chance to participate. Stories resonate so deeply with us. We see this in the movies we love, in the characters and books that we love, even in podcasts and speakers we love to listen to. Their stories are what resonate so deeply with us. And yet, it's so easy to forget that our stories matter. And not just our current moment, but our past is connected to the current moment, and it's connected to where the Lord's taking us moving forward. So let's listen in, let's join in with the team and hear what they have to say this month about why our stories matter.
So welcome to the Deepening Community's Around the Table Zoom. We've been preparing for the Deepening Weekend, and that usually brings us into stories, our stories, the larger story, movies. And then there was something that happened to me last weekend that was such a gift that I want to share about. But before we dive in, I want to hear how everybody's doing. So Robin, how are you coming in tonight?
I am coming in really grateful because Michael and I had the chance to be with our oldest daughter and her husband in California this week, Terry, this past week. I know. And we got to watch Anders play Pebble Beach. And so it was just absolutely beautiful. Carmel is beautiful. Pebble Beach, that golf course is amazing. And so to be able to see those views and the ocean right there, some of the holes just look like the ball is going to drop into the ocean. It was beautiful. It was cold. It was really cold and windy and rainy. So it was really, really sweet with them. But yeah, this is the second time we've been there for this tournament, and I don't know if it's Northern California, but it's cold. It's not Southern California.
Well, stop bringing the cold weather.
It's what?
Stop bringing the cold weather with you.
Did I do that? When we came back, it's been 70 degrees. And so I'm like confused. I thought I was going to be going out to 70 degrees in California, but it's warmer here, way warmer here than it is there. So, but it was a sweet time with our daughter, especially. So I'm really feeling grateful.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Dana, how about you? How are you coming in tonight?
What I have in common with you is time with daughter. My daughter just arrived tonight, a little while ago. I am coming in just as I am, is my, without one plea. I have a house full. I have, my mother-in-law's going away tomorrow morning for a long weekend, and I'm home for the first time, me and my daughter, with my 97-year-old dad father-in-law who has dementia, and I think it's going to be a wild ride. So I am pressing into God and happy to be here tonight, and I need a nap.
I was going to say, I think it sounds like you're both needing naps.
Yes.
After all that travel and getting back and settling in. And then after this time this weekend, Dana, naps for everyone. And we're grateful to have Maggie Greenway with us tonight, caring for each of us through the technology. So Maggie, how are you coming in tonight? And then share some tech stuff with us.
Maggie's
Unmute.
Got it.
There we go.
I'm really good at the tech stuff, apparently.
We all do it.
Coming in kind of mixed tonight, just really seeing places where God is working his goodness in the middle of the tough stuff of life. So kind of where I'm at. But we would love to know how each of you are coming in tonight. So it's not just us that get to share. Would you guys put in the chat how you are feeling tonight, how you're coming in? And while you are messing with things, it looks like everybody's got their own name on their name tag. I had Sherry and Robin for a little bit on mine because ours always comes in like that. But if you want to add where you're coming from onto your name tag, because that kind of helps people. They're like, oh gosh, you live close to me. That's amazing. And then we can connect a little easier. So I will be monitoring the chat and adding links. So if you have any questions or anything, I will hopefully be able to catch that as we go through the evening. So thank you.
Thanks, Maggie.
Yep. Sherry, how about you? How are you coming in tonight?
I'm glad that we get to be real because I'm going to keep it short, but I'm coming in a little sad, so I need a little grace. Yeah, because we said goodbye to our dog yesterday, about 15 years. So I'm just taking deep breaths, and I'm not going to cry because that's what I do in the morning. So now that we all know I'm a little sad, I'd love to talk a little bit about what happened to me last weekend. So last weekend, I got a phone call from a woman that I haven't talked to in probably 3 years. And she had sought me out, and I had shared my story with her some of the time from when my husband and I went through a difficult time in our marriage and ended up divorcing, remarrying, a lot of Jesus in there, it's a big story, too big for this phone call or for the Zoom call. And I had shared that with her 3 years ago. One time, one Zoom call 3 years ago, haven't heard from her since. And so when the phone rang, I kind of, braced myself, not knowing what it was going to be. But I took the call, and she shared with me how significant that was, how significant hearing my story was. And then, so I asked her, I said, so what's been happening since then? And she shared her story of how my story made her curious and intrigued her and brought tears and questions and curiosity for her own story, and has since been walking with Jesus in her marriage in a completely different way. And I won't go into her story, but it changed everything. It changed everything for her, allowing herself to feel the tears and the curiosity for her own story. It was such a holy moment sitting out in the sunshine on the back deck, hearing this woman share her story and how she is now helping men and women in their marriages. And yeah, it was a really sacred time, a really holy time for both of us on the back deck. And so it just got me thinking that the stories we hear, and not just the ones that you hear on a podcast or on a Sunday morning, although those invite us into the larger story too, and they offer us hope. So often it's the stories that we share, the stories of our lives, shared friend to friend, shared with the people in our lives. And it made me think of the woman at the well in John 4, right? She encountered Jesus. She had a story, and she told people. And because she went and she told her story, many, many believed. And I was thinking, they didn't have podcasts. They didn't have Instagram. It was just friends sharing stories. And so, yeah. And it's, of course, it's in this time when we are writing talks, preparing for the Deepening Weekend, which is all about stories. And so it just got me thinking, what does it look like to honor our stories? And what does that even mean? And I was thinking about how for the Deepening Weekend in 2021, Dana shared an amazing talk about what it is to honor our stories. So Dana, I would love to hear from you. Why is that important?
Well, I love your story, Sherry. I think first of all that God is the creator of story. And he describes himself as author and finisher. And he says in scripture that we're his letter. And he invites us to read what he's writing, and he invites us to write with him into the story that he's telling. You can look at Psalm all over scripture, but Psalm 45, it starts off with my tongue is the pen of a ready writer. And John 21 talks about how there are a lot more stories that Jesus that could have been told, but the books of the world could not contain them if we tried. So I love that idea. Our stories are meant to lead us back to God, and our stories are meant to declare the kingdom. Our stories are meant to invite people into their own and what is God up to in their stories. So I love this topic. 2 Corinthians, what is it? It is 2 Corinthians 3 in the Message says, "You yourselves are a letter that anyone can read just by looking at you. Christ himself wrote it, not with ink, but with God's living spirit, not chiseled in stone, but carved into human lives, and we publish it." Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah. Love that.
And so one thing that speaks to me is we are living outside of Eden. We've been talking about this, and Jeremiah tells the story of the exiles, and that this story speaks to my heart profoundly. Israel was taken captive to Babylon, and while they were there, they were longing for home. They wanted life to be back to what it's supposed to be, back to normal. And there were prophets that were saying, you know what? Just hang tight. You're heading back soon. And Jeremiah says to them, actually, that's not what God is saying. He's saying God is inviting you to settle into this place of exile and to make a life here. And Eugene Peterson wrote a book called Run with the Horses, and he talks about this in his book, and I love what he says. He says, finally, most people accepted the message, and jarred out of their everydayness by the exile, they embarked on the search. They settled down to find out what it meant to be God's people in the place that they did not want to be. They did not lose their identity. They discovered it. The exile was the crucible of their faith. They were pushed to the edge of their existence where they thought they were hanging by the skin of their teeth, and they found that in fact they had been pushed to the center where God was. And so to me, to honor our stories is to embark on the search. Lord, what are you writing in the midst of the life that I'm living right now? How do you want to make yourself known to me? And how can I make you known to the people that are in my story through what you're writing? And so I love it. And if I could pull, I have an amazing story from even just this week. I came home from a 2-day retreat and jumped right back into the thick of things and into the thick of work. And I had a crappy, no good, horrible, very bad day on last Wednesday. And everything that I touched crumbled. I lost my patience and kind of went to bed. I had been
Wi-Fi day. That's right. That was the Wi-Fi day.
Practicing just inviting God into the moments like this. And I felt like a failure at doing the practices that I've been trying to do to invite God into the midst of the chaos. So I got up the next morning, a package had come to our house, and it was for the previous tenant. So I had emailed our landlord and said, hey, what do you want me to do with this package? That morning when I got up, he responded to me and he said, she said you could toss it. So I thought, I'm going to see what's in here. So I opened it up, and inside the box are 2 of these boxes, and I don't know if you could see it. It says, it's called Amazing Grace. 2 big, huge bins, and it's body cream, and it's got this whole definition of what this amazing grace is. And I just knew that this was from God for my heart for yesterday, because I just woke up thinking, oh boy. And I wrote down what I heard him say, and this is the message that God gave to me through this gift that this lady gave me. She didn't even know she was shopping for me, but she was shopping for me. I don't even know her, but this is what I heard God say. I am an extravagant God. I have an abundance of amazing grace that I pour out for you, Dana. What I see is a woman drawing near to my heart, and it enthralls me, failed attempts and all. Keep coming back. Here's some amazing grace. Wear it today. Not only will you be reminded of my oceanic abundance, but others will be awash in my fragrance as you go into the day with my fragrance of grace. And I smile and I laugh because, I mean, it's a lifetime supply. So every morning I've been getting up and putting it on. And it just tickled me, and this is how God is writing into my story this week.
Yeah.
And I love it. And I want to see more. I want to see him coming for me like that and share it. So,
yeah. You are seen and known and
that's
loved.
what it felt like.
Yeah. I love that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
I love that. And it's so good, isn't it, to share stories and to be able to hear stories of God's goodness and God, because I think I could miss something like that, right? But yet I want to have eyes to see it. And
Mhm.
often when we hear others tell stories like that, we might be more open and
Yeah.
curious and, hey, I wonder what you're up to here,
Yeah.
Jesus. So thanks for sharing that, Dana. For me, when I got the text today, like you all probably got on your phone, about the Zoom call that said, Robin, what is the story God is writing in your life? The thought came to me that what God is writing and doing now in my life is not disconnected from my past.
Mhm.
It's the ongoing story of my life, and it's all connected. And so when I think of this notion of story, I think of all the moments and events and people that have shaped me in my life up until this point. And to honor my story means, for me, and from what I've come to understand that it means, is to acknowledge both the beauty and the brokenness. And all of our stories hold both,
Mhm.
and the bitter and the sweet. We're learning to hold both. And to consider and remember only the good things and the happy moments. Sherry and I can relate to that in our upbringing, can cause us to live in denial and denying our reality, and keeps us from the possibility of healing, really, where we can actually actively partner with God in ways that bring integration and restoration. And then on the other hand, to only consider and remember the hard things and the wounding moments can cause us to live in like a perpetual state of cynicism and perhaps hopelessness.
Mhm.
And we may miss the opportunity of seeing beauty and redemption.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, I was thinking about how connected they are, both the good and the beautiful and the hard and the painful. I think about when we went away to Blowing Rock, the team, and we said, you know what, everybody bring a story of when you felt loved as a little girl, a story of belovedness.
Yeah.
And we were thinking we were going to just talk about all the good things from girlhood. And it was so interesting because we couldn't stay in just the good. It's too connected.
Right.
Yeah. And before we knew it, you're leaning into the tears and you're leaning into the hard, and they're too connected.
Yeah.
To not share.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. I hadn't forgotten about that.
Mhm.
But yeah, to honor my story is to say, this happened, this particular thing, this particular event happened, and it mattered. And so it gives it proper weight to what happened to me, what I endured, and the impact those moments had on me, and how they continue to shape and influence me and the way that I move in the world, the ways that I respond. And so personally, I've minimized the events over my lifetime. I've minimized the events that were hard and painful in my story. And I actually didn't, up until recently, I didn't see them as wounds or really harmful. And I've been able, as many of you have heard some of you have heard my story, I've been able to name 1,000 little paper cuts. But even calling them paper cuts, it dawned on me the other day, has allowed me to gloss over them and not really allow myself to consider what that actually was like for me and how did it really affect me. So I underestimated their significance and therefore the impact. So an example for me in my story is for 50 years, I've held my mom up on a pedestal, and she is precious. For some of you who know my mom, she is kind and nurturing, and she's always been so highly attuned to my sister and me. I've always described her as the ideal mother, like the perfect mother. And a few years ago, I was talking with a counselor, and I was sharing a story of my dad's anger and my dad's more overt hurt that he caused and how his anger caused me to freeze in the moment and completely shut down. And I was starting to realize that his anger wasn't just normal.
Mhm.
It wasn't okay. It wasn't just a part of his personality or a normal, healthy parenting, parent. But I was finally able to name it as it was abusive. It was harm. It hurt me. It mattered. And it's actually silenced me. It set me up for a lifetime of really making myself small
Mhm.
and quiet and being easy and not having any sort of strength or voice.
Don't rock the boat.
Don't rock the boat.
Mhm.
Yep. Fly under the radar.
Mhm.
And then as I'm sharing this with this counselor, she asked me a question that I did not expect. She said, Robin, where was your mom in all this? And I know. And I quickly made excuses
Mhm.
for my mom. And she pressed in a little bit more, and she began to name some things about my mom that were difficult for me to hear, because then that had me alone. But it felt really true. And so I began to realize that my mom didn't protect me from my dad. She literally turned away and didn't prevent it from happening. And I realized I needed an advocate. I needed my mom, but she abandoned me. And that was a hard thing to say and to name, but yet our bodies hold that. Our bodies know, and it felt so true. And it was like, okay, that makes so much sense. And what that did was, it was a part of my story that I needed to see, that I wasn't willing to see before then. And I needed to acknowledge it, and I needed to really feel how that was for me, and I needed to grieve it. And the tears that came that day were so cleansing and healing for me. So I know that it might seem unnecessary or unkind or dishonoring when we name things like this in our story with our parents in particular, when actually we've come to understand it's quite the opposite. It can be quite the opposite. So when it's accurately named, my body felt a sense of relief and an understanding of like, oh my gosh, so that's why I move this way and react this way. And so, Sherry, to answer, this question of story and the importance of honoring your story, I think the story is honored. Our stories are honored when they are told rightly and when it's named accurately in a way. And this is the important thing. In a way that allows it to be grieved, and hopefully where there is the presence of someone who is offering care and comfort that wasn't there initially. All of that is healing. All of that can be so very healing. And it also allows for the space for a more true experience of forgiveness, I have found, rather than just jumping to forgiveness. But that allows more to be able to, at some point, move into a place of forgiveness. So when we honor our story, we really make space for a deeper healing work of God. I'm coming to understand, and the opportunity to live more true, like from our true selves. It's a truer way of moving and being. So
yeah,
And that gives the rest of us permission to do the same when we witness our friends and our community living that way, Robin. That's really important.
Yeah. And I'm reminded that the truth will set us free. And I think it's more than the truth of Jesus. It's the truth of Jesus in our lives, and him showing us, him inviting us into these spaces, him meeting us in these spaces where we're curious, where we'll allow tears, where we'll allow the hard stuff to be named.
I'm glad you said that, Sherry, because I can honestly say I have experienced the presence of Jesus more in those moments than any other time in my life. Wow. So, yeah.
And that sounds healing.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. And it sounds like when you take that time, when you slow down that way, you can see things that you couldn't see when you were younger
Absolutely.
in the moment.
Yeah.
But now that you
Absolutely.
can, now that you're seeing them and we're telling the stories rightly, there can be healing.
Yes.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. And I love that you mentioned curiosity and tears and the ability to go back and explore that and consider all of that. And I'm thinking about Maggie was sharing a little bit with us earlier this week about a story that she encountered that brought tears and curiosity. And Maggie, I'd love for you to share that if you would.
Yeah. We were actually talking about this morning in the Deepening Community Facebook group as well. I love how Zoweh, in my time and experience at Zoweh, just brings stories and movies and clips. And this experience to me felt like one such clip where, I'm just watching The Chosen, which is a favorite of mine, but the story where, and it's over 2 episodes, but the story where the woman has the issue of blood and she is desperate for healing. And I love the way that they, expand her story and make it more than just a handful of verses in the Bible. But I was watching the scene, particularly where she is healed and where Jesus is like, somebody touched me and power went out from me. What happened? And she realizes she needs to say something. And she's, huddled down on the ground. She's looking down and Jesus comes to her and is like, daughter, your faith has made you well. And it was just moving and beautiful. But the part that the unexpected tears just exploded out of my face was when he acknowledged, you've been struggling with this for so long. And I don't know how the exact line from the show, and then he says, and they both say it together. He says, that must have been, and then exhausting, or you must be. And they both said exhausted. At the same moment of just that compassion for the length of time that she struggled. And just tears shooting out my face. Because to me, it was where my story bumped up to that story was just like, it was like Jesus looking at me in the face and just holding my face and saying, I see the suffering that you and your family have faced for so long, and the exhaustion that you faced. Excuse me. My dad was sick with MS for 30 years before he passed 3 years ago. And it was, my mom's on this call, so she's probably crying. I can't see her. But it was just a beautiful acknowledgement of chronic grief and chronic sickness, chronic illness. And just to have it's just that longing of Jesus saying, I see the struggle you're going through, and I see that it's a large weight. And there's just such comfort in that. So I think that it's such a beautiful thing to be able to have a visual of what it is we long for. And it just felt like such a sweet moment from Jesus. And in the Facebook group this morning, we were talking about, each person was like, I was like, not messed up, but like undone by that, like tears shooting out, but in different ways, right? It could have been from a different, like that he called her daughter or called her clean, declared her clean, but like just that to be able to see that was just beautiful. Yeah. Thanks for asking that.
Love that story. I love that too. We were talking earlier, Maggie and I loved that part, what you said, how he honors her story and how The Chosen gives this story flesh and heart and the weight, the proper weight that words on a page can't always do. So I'm so grateful that we get to see these stories like this and to see how Jesus honored her story and her personhood with such tenderness and care. Just, is beautiful. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Thank you, Robin. And thank you, Dana. I thank each of you for sharing. It's so important. It's so important. And so
Thank you for joining us for this month's Around the Table conversation. We invite you to join us next month. We are going to be talking about soul rest and stillness and how our hearts long for that. It will be on March 9th at 8 p.m. Eastern. The link can always be found at thedeepeningcommunity.com. If you enjoyed this month's Around the Table conversation, would you do us a favor and like it and share it with a friend or on your social media? Also, you can subscribe to Zoweh's YouTube channel so that you'll never miss a video. See you next month.